Tomorrow marks the 25th anniversary of this network. As part of MSNBC's 25th birthday, we're all writing essays that appear on msnbc.com/the next25. In my essay, I quote the famous line of my former boss, Democratic Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. You're entitled to your own opinion, but not your own facts. To make the point about how far from reality the Republican Party has traveled in the last 25 years, and to consider what it will take in the next 25 years to bring the Republican Party back to reality, the day MSNBC premiered 25 years ago, Republican Senate leader Bob Dole was getting crushed in the polls by Bill Clinton in the presidential campaign. Senator Moynihan never suggested that his friend Bob Dole was creating his own facts, because the Dole campaign against President Bill Clinton was about differing opinions, not differing facts. The Republican tactic of demonizing the other side had not yet taken hold in the Senate, although Newt Gingrich had been using it in the House of Representatives for years at that point. Little did we know at the time that the Senate was mounting the last stand against the politics of demonization. Some Democrats wanted to try that tactic. On August 11th, 1994, when the Clinton health care bill was being debated on the Senate floor with Finance Committee Chairman Moynihan as the floor manager of the bill and me with a front row seat on the Senate floor beside the chairman, we had one of those luncheon gatherings of Democratic senators like the one President Biden attended today. The president never attended those luncheons then, but often sent high-ranking representatives from the White House. The Clinton White House official who joined us in the luncheon that day told us that the message of the day on the Senate floor should be demonize Dole. Nothing about the policy in Bob Dole's Republican health care bill that was competing with the Clinton health care bill on the Senate floor, just demonize Dole. The White House was understandably frustrated that the Clinton health care bill was stuck in the predictably slow motion of the Senate floor, where it would, a few weeks later, eventually die. From that frustration came the message of the day from the White House: demonize Dole. I knew there were no more than a couple of Democratic senators in that room who might be willing to do that. The rest of them fully respected Bob Dole, and many of them were proud to call him a friend. The wounded combat veterans in the room shared that special bond with Bob Dole, who was severely wounded in World War II in combat in Italy. One of the combat veterans in the Democratic Senator's lunch was Senator Bob Kerrey of Nebraska, who lost a leg in Vietnam. He said nothing about the demonized Dole strategy in the room, but as soon as the meeting was over, he walked onto the Senate floor and asked Chairman Moynihan for time to speak. And when you hear what Senator Kerrey had to say that day, consider how far we have come and how impossible it would be to apply these words to the current Republican leader of the Senate.
I have read Senator Dole's bill. I see principles in this bill that are similar to principles that I have as well. I believe the distinguished senator from Kansas is first and foremost a patriot. He is a patriot before he is a Republican. I have seen him lay aside his party concerns for his concerns for this nation on many occasions. And I believe sincerely and genuinely that he's prepared to do it again now. And I intend to participate not only with the distinguished senator from Kansas, but with other members of this body who see a problem in this country and are prepared, urgently prepared, to work to try to solve it. And I yield the floor.
The senator from New York.
Mr. President, may I just express my gratitude for those noble words from a gallant United States senator. They have the capacity to change the course of this debate, and I hope they will do.
And joining us now is former Democratic Senator of Nebraska, Bob Kerrey. Senator Kerrey served in the United States Senate from 1988 to 2001. And as you know, Senator, there's no applause in the Senate, but what you got from Senator Moynihan there was the equivalent of a standing ovation at the time. But I'm so struck by so much of what you had to say that day and looking at it today. Just that phrase that Bob Dole is a patriot before he is a Republican. What happened to that? What happened to that concept in the United States Senate?
Well, Yeah, I mean, some of it has to do with American people themselves. They've become far more polarized than in the 1990s. So some of it has to do with the earlier conversation you had about Facebook. You really don't get attention on social media unless you insult people, and a fair amount of it you can lay at the doorstep of former President Trump. I mean, he blew away the norms. We used to have norms of behavior. And there's no law, there's no rules, there's nobody going to enforce them and throw you in jail if you blow up the norms. And he reveled in it. He reveled in insulting people. He reveled in lying. He reveled in doing things that were different. And a lot of his supporters have said, at least he's speaking his mind. Well, that's not normative behavior. We shouldn't reward people who are violating what we consider to be decent normative behavior in any civil conversation away from the United States Senate itself. So, I have to say, I give former President Trump a lot of credit for having destroyed those norms and made it a lot more likely that people say, well, he's lying. Why can't I? He's insulting people. Why can't I? He doesn't worry about the truth. Why should I? And it makes it really difficult for the Congress to resolve conflicts over immigration, conflicts over trade, conflicts over these, healthcare, difficult issues where, if you're going to try to get something done, you've got to find middle ground. You've got to have a Democrat who will defend the Republican on the right, and the Republican defends the Democrat from assault from the right. But now it's just gotten much more difficult. And I think, I don't think it's a both sides problem. I think it's a problem that's been created first and foremost by former President Trump, and there's way too few people that are willing to say, no, we're not going to support somebody who's lying about what happened in the election, who continues to encourage people to engage in, I would say, really bad behavior, including not getting vaccinated.
I need you to explain one person to me, and that is Mitch McConnell, because when we were working in the Senate, I personally regarded Mitch McConnell as, yes, one of the conservative members of the Republican Party, but a perfectly reasonable representative of that side of the Republican Party, who we did business with in a normal way. I would have said it would be impossible for Mitch McConnell to go along with someone like Donald Trump, and I would have been very wrong.
I can't explain it to you, Morris. I don't know. I'm with you. I mean, he and I worked closely together when I was in the Senate, and it's like watching a different human being. He's enormously competent. He knows how the Senate operates. He knows how to get things done, but he's become way too much of a toady for the former president.
One of the things that fascinates me about it, not just with Mitch McConnell, but with others, is the collapse of the male ego, which I always thought was a very powerful force in the United States Senate. I mean, when we were there, it didn't matter what the president wanted. It mattered what the chairman of the various committees wanted. They wouldn't necessarily publicly break, but it was very, very hard to get these people to kind of get in line. But with Trump, it looked effortless.
Well, independent of Trump, by the way, Lawrence, I mean, the power has been shifting away from the committees to the leadership office, and that's because of the fundraising committees, the DSCC, the RSCC, the DCCC. Yeah, these are 4 committees, 2 in the House, 2 in the Senate, 2 Republicans, 2 Democratic committees. And, they're raising money to oppose people that you're working with. So you've seen, I mean, when you and I had our hair longer than we should have back in the 1990s, you didn't, if you wanted to have a tax bill, it had to go through the Finance Committee. Not anymore. They'll bring it straight to the floor. And that's not a partisan issue. Both Republicans and Democratic leaders have way too much power, and it's made it more difficult.
Well, and it's also that's also part of explaining why it was as easy as it was for Trump to get the entire Republican Congress in line, because he really just needed to capture the leadership.
Well, but Lawrence, I have only like 1 or 2 famous statements that I've ever made in my life. One of them was calling Bill Clinton an unusually good liar as a consequence of him saying, I didn't want to raise taxes. The Congress made me do it. You've got to stand up and say, look, we're Article 1 of the Constitution. We're the Congress. And if the president of the United States is constantly lying, you got to break and say he's lying. And they haven't done it. And it's a real problem, it seems to me, because it creates permission for him to continue.